Okay, so we're live now. Hi, everybody. This is Michelle with Lone Star Left. I am live today with Shaker. He is running for House District 121. That's in San Antonio. We did have a couple other guests lined up today, but they had some last minute stuff come up. So it's just me and Shaker, but that's great because that'll give us more time to talk about what he's got going on. So, Shaker, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor to be here on your podcast, and I've been your fan for a long time. I'm a paid subscriber to your newsletter from several months ago, much before I decided to run for office. The I always look forward to your articles. In fact, there's only one other person whose articles I look forward to in the same spirit, and that's the former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. So he also, like you, has the same, democratic values and cares a lot about the labor movement, the middle income, and the lower income groups. So it's really an honor to be here. And uh, I'm running as a Democrat to be the Texas state representative for House District 121. I'm an immigrant from India. I came here in the mid 80s as a graduate teaching assistant. I graduated 3 years later with dual masters in math and computer science from Penn State University. Those initial 3 years were quite tough, as the joke and reality was that graduate teaching assistants with families, and I had two small kids, uh, that they survived on a stipend that was below the poverty level. So I fondly remember that when we would go to Kmart, she would recognize the symbol for Kmart and would say, Kmart, but she did not recognize the symbol for McDonald's, which in one sense was good. However, the degrees from Penn State, they did open doors for me, and we started making progress. So one thing is that education and including higher education does open doors for people, and we saw that. So I worked subsequently in the IT industry for nearly 3 decades, and I retired a year and a half ago. On the way, I got an MBA and an MS in Global Supply Chain Management from Indiana University. I saved my last employer, Endeavor, now known as Marathon Petroleum, over $1 million per year for a couple of years until they were acquired by Marathon Petroleum. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can read what my former CIO, Tim Harris, has written about it in his endorsement on LinkedIn, endorsing me as an IT professional. Um, Earlier in India, I was fortunate to compete in two prestigious services. One was a special class railway apprenticeship. It was a 4-year program where I was able to get bachelor's degrees in electrical and mechanical engineering, and I served briefly in the Indian Railways as a mechanical engineer. And after that, I joined the Indian Police Service and served there for nearly 8 years, mainly in supervisory positions. I have volunteered for various Democratic candidates from 2020 elections onwards, doing phone banking, text banking, and knocking at doors. I have also been serving as the Democratic precinct coordinator for my precinct for a year now, trying to build relationships with Democratic voters in my precinct and nudging them to vote in elections, which, as you know, is very important. Um, I decided to run for this position because democracy itself is at stake, yeah, in the elections, in the coming elections, and also for the following reasons. The future of our public schools, including over 90% of Texas kids attending them is at stake, with our governor pushing for vouchers, which will just take public money or tax dollars away from public schools to benefit private schools. And our public schools are already underfunded. Secondly, women's reproductive rights need to be protected by codifying Roe v. Wade, period. Number three, Texas has the highest percentage of residents, including children, without health insurance. Yet Republicans in our state legislature have opposed expanding Medicaid, where the federal government would actually pay bulk of the money needed to support those programs. I support expanding programs like that, which can help people that need a helping hand. Number four, gun violence is the leading cause of death of children in the United States. This is a problem that is unique to the United States. No other developed country has this problem. It is not a problem about mental illness, as Republicans tend to portray. So I firmly believe that we need to implement common sense gun safety reforms to protect our children and even adults who get killed in random shootings.
Yeah.
Number five, I support making our public universities affordable. And yet the average tuition fee for public colleges in Texas, they doubled in the 15-year period from 2003 onwards. I would like to have that trend reversed. Number six, I want to make voting easier, ending gerrymandering, and implementing campaign finance reforms. I support protecting LGBTQ rights, the rights of labor to organize, and that we need to fight for climate change and to protect our environment. So those are the reasons that motivated me to run for this election.
Okay. And so 121, and I was just looking at the numbers this morning. 121 is a flippable seat. It is very much a flippable seat. I think in 2020 they were like 0.2 or I'm sorry, 2 + 2 Trump. And if Trump is back on the ballot and a lot of people are just fed up with him, I really do see this seat flipping this election cycle. And you do have a primary candidate. I haven't really heard anything or seen anything from your primary candidate, but I definitely want to hear from you on what sets you above any other Democrat who might be running at the moment.
So my opponent in the primary is a lady by the name of Laurel Jordan Swift. And from what I have learned, I have met her a couple of times at meetings organized by the Bexar County Democratic Party, and she's a good Democrat. In fact, initially, I was, as you were writing newsletters where you were mentioning that so many seats are still. No Democrat has yet signed up for election, and like you, I was also very concerned about that. Is this seat, will no Democrat sign up to oppose the incumbent? Because that's the worst thing. We cannot allow Republicans to win seats unopposed. So I was trying to reach out to my friends and colleagues in the Democratic Party to find out who is anybody running, who is running, and when I found that nobody is going to run, then I made the decision almost 2 weeks before the deadline that okay, I'm going to run. She decided on the last day to file. From what I've heard of her speech, she just now came up with her website, and from what she has mentioned to me, that she stands for almost the same policy positions that I have stated. She is she's a successful business person. She has a medical equipment business, and so when she signed up, she called me, and she asked me that um, since I was inquiring, is anybody else running? Um, she said that, well, now I'm running. Are you still excited about running? So I responded that yes. And now I am pretty invested in this election cycle. And I do plan on running, and I plan on running on a positive platform. So I will strive to win in this primary. But if I lose, then I will canvass for you and other Democrats up and down the ballot so that they prevail in the November election. So I think she's a good Democrat, but I think I'm a better Democrat because of the work that I have done for Democrats in the past. I think I understand the issues and what it will take to win the election. But
Okay.
she is a formidable candidate. I think she has been endorsed by Emily's List, so
Okay.
she's keeping me on my toes.
Well, and that's what we need in Texas. We need not just general elections, but primary elections that are exciting and really engage the voters. So, once we do get past the primary phase, the opponent for 121 is Steve Allison, right?
Well, Steve has a more difficult primary because he has two opponents. He has one opponent. Uh, his last name is Lahood, who is more on the right. So he's a MAGA Republican. And then Mike Champion, who ran even the last time against him in the primary. So, as you know, Steve, as you may be aware, Steve Allison, he voted for vouchers. I'm sorry, he voted against vouchers.
Mhm.
And so he incurred the displeasure of the governor. So the governor said that, he is going to support La Hood. And and Steve also voted for the impeachment of our Attorney General Ken Paxton. So Ken
Wow.
Paxton also said that he is going to support Lahoud. So so Steve does have a difficult primary, and if he doesn't get over 50% of the votes, then he'll probably have to go for a runoff, which will be
Runoff,
in
yeah.
May. But he has a difficult one because Lahoud seems to have a lot of support from the Republican high-ups.
Yeah. And they'll probably be dumping a lot of money into it.
Yes.
Um, so, I guess regardless of who wins, whether it is Steve Allison or Mark LaHood, what do you think it's going to take for a Democrat to flip 121?
So, as you mentioned, in 2020, President Biden lost this district to Trump only by 2%.
Mhm.
Although Steve Allison did perform better against his Democratic rival. So, and even with Steve Allison, what I have noticed that in his three elections, when the voter participation goes up, his margin of victory goes down. So it is about making sure that voters understand what is at stake here. There are a lot of Democratic voters who don't vote, right? And um, we need to let them be aware of what is at stake in the election. Now, I'll tell you about an incident that happened while I was doing text banking for the Beto campaign.
Mhm.
So, as you know, the initial burst of text messages went out to about 500 voters, and then the responses started to trickle in, and there was a lady who responded, so the message that went out was something to the effect that, hi, this is Shaker for Beto campaign. As you know, Beto is running for governor of Texas as a Democrat, and he stands for X, Y, and Z. So can we count on your support and vote for Beto? And so this lady, she responded and she said that I'm a Republican and I will be voting for Republicans. So I followed the script. It said that, well, thanks for letting us know and you have a nice day. And I moved on to the next response. Well, 10 minutes later, she sent a response back and she asked the question, what is Beto's position on abortion? And I said, well, that's a great question. So again, I sent her the response that Beto is pro-choice and so on and so forth. And then she responded that then I will vote for Beto. So uh, a lot of women are not aware about the implications of the laws that have been passed by Republicans restricting their reproductive rights. And it will take an effort to make sure that people understand that what is at stake. Now, you and I may be aware of what happened to Kate Cox and her case, and other women who have had to. Kate Cox was fortunate to have money that she could go and to another state and get the abortion that she needed for saving her life. But there are women who do not have that kind of money. And there was an article in Texas Tribune that there was a lady in Dallas, in your area, who was forced to carry an unviable pregnancy to term.
Yeah.
And even in Kate Cox's case, as you know, she it is unfortunate that she had to knock at the doors of courts to get a medically necessity procedure to be done. But the district judge in Austin, she passed a judgment in her favor, granting her the permission. And yet our attorney general, he wrote very nasty letters to three area hospitals in Houston, threatening them with civil and criminal liabilities if they followed the judge's order. I mean, that's really unconscionable. I mean, it almost tantamounts to um, contempt of court, and yet there was no repercussions. Ken Paxton and the Supreme Court of Texas reversed that court judgment from the district judge, which is unfortunate. So I think, long story short, it will need efforts to again make sure that voters are aware of what is at stake in this election. Besides women's rights, besides the fact that we need to protect our children from gun violence, besides the fact that your your the public schools, they are you may have your children going there, and what is the impact going to be if these vouchers are implemented? I was talking with a cleaning lady the other day, and um, and she said that her two children, um, they're not yet registered to vote. So initially, she told me that, well, if I register, I'm sure that uh, I'm going to be called for jury duty. So then I realized that for her, getting called for jury duty is loss of income, right?
Yeah.
And we have to be cognizant of that fact. Well, then I explained to her that in your case you have four grandchildren going to schools, public schools, right? These are the things that are at stake. She mentioned that, and she's now convinced that yeah, she needs to get registered and to vote. But she was still saying that, my three children, they don't seem to be so inclined. And my daughter was saying that, well, how does one vote matter? And I was telling her that, well, do you know that Bush Jr., he became president just by virtue of winning a few hundred votes in Florida? So, every vote matters. And So we have to be do a good job of reaching out um, to our voters in this district and make sure that they vote.
Right.
If they're unregistered voters, make sure that they register, and so that's what it will take. But it can certainly be flipped. I agree with
Right.
you.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. Educating voters is, it should be the priority for every candidate. I'm doing my part, and I think that, um, if people knew what was on the ballot, if they knew what the issues were, if they knew what the GOP had running down the pipeline, for 2025 and 2026, that they probably would run to the polls and do something about it quick. And I have brought this up in both of my previous two episodes, and I definitely wanted to talk about it again because it's such a big issue right now, is what's happening on the border. Greg Abbott has been given an order to stand down from the Supreme Court to allow Border Patrol back into Shelby Park and back towards the border. And there's this perception from Republicans that Abbott is stopping immigration, or he's stopping, I don't know what they think. Um, but from the Texas House, from, your perspective, if you're elected, what do you think has to be done, not only to rein in Greg Abbott, but to make sure that, there's no more of this shenanigans going on in the El Paso and Eagle Pass regions?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And have you seen the movie American President? It came out about 30 years ago with Michael Douglas as the
Oh, Michael
president.
Douglas, yeah, and Annette Bening, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a scene in that movie where the president, Michael Douglas, he's addressing the press in the press room of White House. And he's talking about his opponent, and he said, Bob, and he says, whatever your problem is, Bob is not interested in solving it. He is interested in two things and two things alone. He wants you to be afraid of the problem, and he wants to blame somebody else for it. And that's exactly the playbook of our Republicans, including our Governor Abbott. He has
Yeah.
no interest in solving the problem of this migrant issue that we have on our border. He just wants to raise, make people afraid that you have these illegal immigrants coming from across the border, and but not to solve the problem. And I was listening to the news about the New Hampshire primaries, and voters in New Hampshire were concerned about these migrants coming across. Yet, these same people, including our governor, he is not, he is fine with those migrant labor, when they're mowing their lawns and building their houses and doing the road construction in the Texas heat. There's an article written by I'm forgetting her first name. I think it's Marcella Valdez in New York Times, and it's the title of the article is something like, "Why can't we stop illegal immigration?" And then in the title itself, it says, "Because it works. Our broken immigration system gives the best hope to some of these migrants and their U.S. employers." So in her article, she mentions that even our labor laws, they have been written in such a way that they exclude our farm laborers
Mhm.
and they exclude domestic workers from being in the purview of the labor laws. So they are being exploited by our employers. In some of the industries, they are trying to get around following the labor laws applicable, like in meatpacking industries, etc., by hiring not directly but through contract labor, and they're trying to evade it. So there is a problem because you have demand for some of this labor, and then there's a problem with the supply. Um, and and I think in one of your articles you have written that a lot of this migration is happening because of policies of the United States. You have written about, the Iron River, right?
Yeah.
The arms, I mean, which are so easily available here, and then they are smuggled from the United States through the border to Mexico and these countries, and it's leading to crime and it's leading to instability in those countries. We have imposed sanctions on Venezuela, and uh, and as you have written, and I agree with it, that it's a broken state, where inflation is over 190%.
Yeah.
So I think we have to address all those issues. So what the governor misses is that you cannot just have some fence or wall and you can solve this problem. You have to address the source of the problem,
Yeah.
and the fact that our asylum system is broken, our immigration laws is broken. Both the parties know it, but and it's good that at least in the Senate there's a bipartisan effort going on to fix some of these loopholes in our asylum laws and in our immigration laws, and to properly fund the enforcement of those laws, and Congress of course also can set our foreign policy so that we can address we can change our approach to Venezuela and Cuba and those countries from where we are getting all this migration, so that they have stable countries, and this need for these people to migrate doesn't arise. At the same time, we need to have programs where guest worker programs that need to be more robust, so that if our industries need to have that, or our farms need to have that kind of labor, that they can come legally, and our industries can be supported rather than illegally and have these persons in the shadow. So I think the ball is rightly in the court of our Congress, and hopefully they will come up with a solution. I'm concerned that even though the Republican senators seem to be inclined to have such a bipartisan bill passed, but the MAGA Republicans in the House, they seem to be threatening under the influence of former President Trump, who doesn't want, again, for that same reason, they don't want to solve the problem, but they want to keep scaring the people that you have this big issue, and President Biden is doing nothing about it.
Yeah. So let's say hypothetically, next year, you win and Democrats manage to flip the entire Texas House, which would be wonderful. We actually need 12 seats to get there. Maybe we'll do that this year. I don't know. I say that every year though. But if the House is flipped, what do you think that Democrats should do to address Operation Lone Star?
Well, I mean, that Operation Lone Star should be defunded. I don't think there is any value in building that wall, or having those laws which go and target these poor migrants. I think the governor has wasted billions of dollars in shipping in sending these migrants on buses to other states, blue states that he calls, and it is cruel. I mean, I remember I was in the DC area and it was very cold, I think 2 years ago or maybe a year ago, and on a cold winter night, the governor had a busload of migrants, including children, dropped outside the house of our Vice President Kamala Harris without any uh, heads up
Yeah.
on a cold winter night. I mean, this is this is just being cruel. And so that Operation Lone Star needs to be defunded. And I mean, there's no point in wasting $12 billion or something to that effect in that effort. And it's time to be actually adults like some of the Republicans in Senate are becoming now. I mean, I've heard Lindsey Graham and some other people who are trying to urge their Republican peers in the House that you need to support this solution and support this bill. You're not going to get a better bill, even if President Trump wins the election and we get both the chambers of Congress next year, because Democrats will not give you some of the things that they are willing to yield. So I think that money that's being wasted there can be better used by funding our public schools. Texas is 35th in the country. There's a recent survey done by CNBC where they said that Texas dropped from 22nd to 35th for education. Our per pupil funding is amongst the lowest, and our teachers' salary in public schools lags the national average, and it shouldn't be. We should be leading that effort. I mean, education is in my case itself, you know, it opened doors. Both our children grew up in Austin, and they went to public schools in Austin Independent School District, right from elementary school to middle school to high school. And because of the excellent education that was provided to them, thanks to the teachers and staff in the Austin Independent School District of those schools, one went to Harvard, the other one went to MIT for their undergraduate degrees. And they are both successful physicians today. So good public school education launched their American dreams, and we should ensure that our public schools are properly funded so that they can launch the American dreams of the 90%, over 90% of Texas kids attending them. So that money which is being wasted, the $12 billion or so, can be better used by funding our public schools better, by expanding Medicaid, where over 90% of the funds are provided by the federal government. So there are the much better use for those funds, and that Operation Lone Star should be abolished. In fact, I agree with your another article that you had written about our Congressman Joaquin Castro. He said that the Texas National Guard should be taken over by the president, because evidently our governor is trying to use that to create a conflict with the federal government.
Yeah, and yeah, it's absurd. So back to public schools, and I want to talk about this because it ties in to property taxes. As you are probably aware, Texas has the fifth most highest property taxes in all of America. And the reason why is because property owners fund 60% of education, while the state funds, it's a little bit more than 40, but it's roughly about 40%. So, each year, each legislative session, the Republicans talk about, well, we're giving this huge tax cut. We're, cutting everybody's taxes for property taxes. But what they do is just a temporary buy down. So they buy down the tax for 2 years, and then the next 2 years, it shoots back up. And they come back and they're like, oh, we're giving everybody these property tax cuts. So if you listen to them, you would think that we've got the lowest property tax rate, right now in the country, but we don't. So what has to be done to not only properly fund education, but also to lower property taxes? Do you think that those are the same issue?
Yeah, so I think that we need to figure out better ways of funding our public schools. Because right now, what happens is that as you have mentioned, 60% of the funding comes from property taxes. What happens is that the richer uh, districts, right? They tend to be able to fund the school districts in their jurisdiction, and the poorer ones, they don't have adequate funds, and so that creates a problem.
Mhm.
And so I think this funding needs um, to be revised so that there is some kind of an equity that the poor risk districts, when they cannot get adequate amount of funds from property taxes, the state tries to the state tries to intervene and provide them with more funding. Now, even in property taxes, I think there needs to be some kind of a sliding scale where those who are at the lower income groups, you know, they should be allowed to pay at a lesser rate, and then progressively, as as your property value is going higher, you pay a higher percentage for your property tax. So unfortunately, our state, just relies on sales tax. There's no income tax, and sales tax is very regressive. And so I recommend, I am inclined towards the richer people who have richer estates, that they need to pay a higher percentage for property taxes. And part of the funds that come from that should not just go into their district. That needs to be more equitably distributed so that the poorest school districts, where in poorer areas, they get the adequate funding so that their children can also get the best public school education.
Okay. And
In
so,
fact, I recall in one of the episodes, you have endorsed Karthik Sura for
uh-huh.
Texas Senate, right? And he mentions about imposing a tax on billionaires, which I support also if we can somehow do that, because and, we need we need our super rich people to be able to pay their fair share of taxes. And that's not happening because we do not have income tax, we do not have a wealth tax, and we need to revisit this in the state legislature.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And so while we're on the topic of state budget and taxes, what is your opinion on the legalization of cannabis?
Well, I'm all for it. I think I support the democratic position. Unnecessarily, there are a lot of people who are put in behind bars, and we need to legalize cannabis.
Okay. And so the next thing that the next legislative session that Republicans are going to be targeting is women's right to travel. And so what we've seen in various cities like out in the Panhandle, and I think Lubbock was one of them, that they're passing these laws that say that pregnant women who are driving out of Texas to leave the state to get an abortion um, it's illegal to do that. They can't do that. So do you think that something should be done um, to stop these cities from, passing these mandates? Or do you think that, legalizing the right to choose would eliminate that? Or you explain that to me.
Well, absolutely. If I am elected and we are able to get a democratic majority, and even if without a democratic majority, we need to work together with the Republicans on ensuring that we do not harass women who are pregnant and have a medical necessity for abortion. We should not harass them like the way it is happening, and we should definitely pass laws prohibiting these local counties that are somehow they feel inclined because of their religious beliefs to prevent women from seeking the health care that they need.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we are just about out of time. I'm gonna give you like a couple minutes to just wrap it up and tell people where they can find you at, online on social media.
Sure. So once again, this is thanks for giving me this opportunity, Michelle. It's been an honor and a privilege to have met you finally. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and I'm running to your listeners. I'm running as a Democrat for Texas State Representative for House District 121, which primarily covers north central and northeastern San Antonio with some adjoining rural areas, thanks to gerrymandering by our Republican friends. And I I am for ensuring that our public schools provide the best education, just like they provided to my children when they were growing up in Austin, and that we say no to vouchers, that we protect women's right to choose by codifying Roe v. Wade, that we um, ex, uh, expand programs like Medicaid um, to cover our residents that are uninsured, including children. That we expand those federal programs that can provide food to children. I mean, there's Texas leads in food insecurity for children. I mean, this is unconscionable that
Yeah.
a state that has $18 billion in reserve and we have food insecurity for almost 20% of children or somewhere in that neighborhood, that we do take steps to ensure that we protect our children from gun violence, which is the leading cause of death of children in the United States, and we make our public universities affordable because education is the way by which we can lift all our children and give them a chance to achieve their American dreams. And we need to protect our voting rights and gerrymandering, implement campaign finance reforms so that billionaires, don't decide what we do with our lives, and we protect the rights of our LGBTQ community, our labor union rights, and we make sure that we fight climate change and we protect our environment. And you can reach me, you can find more about me on Sinha for Texas.com. That's SINHA for Texas.com. If you can afford, please make a contribution. If not, at least sign up to be a volunteer. And if you can do either one of them, at least make sure that your friends and family members they do vote in the coming elections because it's going to be very crucial. Thanks again for giving me
Yes.
this opportunity, Michelle.
Absolutely, Shaker, and thank you so much for your support. Remember, everybody, March 5th is the primary election for Democrats in Texas. March 5th, early voting starts like 2 weeks before that. February 5th is the last day you have to register to vote if you're not registered. So don't forget to do about that. It's really important. And we will see you next Wednesday where we'll have a slate of new candidates.